Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for this evening's debate is that the burka or niqab should be banned in Australia, a statement that we, the affirmative team, agree with. We would like to define the topic as the burka or niqab, an enveloping outer garment worn by women in some Islamic traditions to cover themselves, should be prohibited from being worn in public and enforced legally. We'd like to point out that a burka is basically a niqab with a veil instead of a small hole for the eyes. Thus, for simplicity's sake, we'll be using the word burka in reference to all Islamic full-body coverings, but not headscarves like the hijab, which are perfectly acceptable. Now on to our points. As first speaker, I would contextualise the situation, consider the burqa ban in other countries as well as public opinion, and finally the fact that the burqa isn't integral to the Islamic faith. Owen will discuss how the burqa creates a sense of divide amongst Australians as a multicultural nation, as well as how the burqa creates tension in regards to security and advocates misconception about Islam. Finally, Xavier will rebut and sum up our points. Contextually, ladies and gentlemen, the banning of the burqa is an extremely contentious issue in Australia at the moment. Pauline Hanson's recent stunt, which we do not endorse, has largely revived the ongoing dispute in the public's eye as to whether or not we should ban the garment so commonly associated with Islam. The debate has been going on for years now with little actual result, and the Australian public is quite sick of a fairly minor political issue receiving so much publicity instead of politicians addressing legitimate concerns in the Australian economy. According to Morgan Research, out of 1,328 Australians interviewed, a majority of 55.5% wanted the burqa banned, highlighting the fact that more people do in fact want the clothing to become illegal in public. Reasoning behind the ban ranges from its symbolic association with terrorism to, in many cases, the fact that it inadvertently alienates and segregates a portion of Muslims from the rest of society. Over time, politicians, most notably Pauline Hanson, have tried to see the burqa ban with a large portion of society, including our team, disregarding her fanaticism and lunacy. Although her methods are absurd, frankly, there is merit to the idea that the burqa is illegal in public. It should be made illegal in public. The risk the burqa actually pose is exacerbated by modern politicians, yet in several countries the burqa's already been banned, and it's by doing a case study of those countries we're able to see the effects of legally restricting the Islamic clothing. A surprisingly large amount of countries have the burqa legally banned in one way or another. These include Italy, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Bulgaria, Russia, Morocco, China, and Switzerland. And the gargantuan proportion of countries that have made the face covering illegal, the common denominator is that they've made it illegal in public and not in private for safety reasons. For example, in the Netherlands, they placed a partial ban on the burqa and Islamic veils to be worn. They can be worn in streets, but not in closed public buildings, which is a reasonable stance when considering the ban doesn't breach the right for people to act as they please in private or even on the streets. In terms of historical banning, according to the ABC, Italy made illegal covering one's face with a motorcycle helmet or veil illegal in public in 1975, well before the global threat of terrorism became mainstream. Perhaps the most notorious and recent instance of banning the burqa, however, was in France in 2011. The Pew Research Centre found that 0.01% of the French Muslim population and 0.00058% of the general population actually wear the burqa. It is evident then that the burqa ban largely does not affect the population, but rather quells public outcry and advocates the principles of vivre ensemble, as well as protecting the Muslim population from racial vilification, according to French MP Louis Morel. Across the world, the burqa has been banned for not only the safety of other citizens, but Muslims themselves. perhaps it's time Australia followed the global consensus, as clearly there is merit to the idea of banning the burqa. Freedom of religion is an inalienable right in Australia, being an area of law where the government is prohibited from legislating in, and many would consequently argue that banning the burqa would go against one of the many principles that upholds our democracy. However, the full body cloak is not actually integral to the Islamic faith or affects it in any way. As mentioned, the burqa is a non-compulsory garment worn only by those who choose to don the full covering, with many Muslim women choosing not to wear the clothing, as per the French statistics earlier. As for what the Quran, the Islamic Bible, says, it does not specifically mention the burqa or tell women to wear such extremely confining clothing. Instead, it instructs women and men to act and behave modestly in society, according to Rafiki Rasad of TrueIslam.com. It does exclaim women should cover their other body parts, but nowhere does the Quran actually specify or even suggest that the burqa, the idea of a burqa. It is not an essential Islamic garb, and is perhaps a hyperbolization of the term modest, when in comparison, men needn't wear any full body coverings. In this way, the burqa promotes inequality amongst gender and is overall an unnecessary garb that isn't essential to Islam, with many Muslim women choosing not to wear the burqa for those exact reasons. The fact stands that, according to Jason Taladoros, academic on the history of religion, that perhaps 500 years ago, at the birth of Islam, such a garb was appropriate based on the generally misogynistic socio-political climate of the times. However, it holds little place in today's society, not aligning with modern views and instead promoting an antiquated perception of the world, which is something that simply cannot exist in our progressive society. Although generally the burqa is worn by choice, it is symbolic of a complete segregation and alienation of not only women, but also Muslims in general, thereby perpetuating Islamophobia and the fear of the other, which Owen will elaborate on later. Overall, the burqa is harmful to the structure of our society when viewed from an objective stance, and added with the fact that it isn't even compulsorily worn, there is little reason for it not to be banned. To conclude, the burqa should be banned, as it is an unnecessary garment that many other countries have banned and exists predominantly as a symbol of segregation and misogyny. Finally, I'll leave you with a quote from an imam, a Muslim priest who runs a mosque in Sydney. We advocate Islam, we advocate the Quran, we do not advocate the burqa.
call upon the first negative speaker, Luke Julie.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that the burka and niqab should be banned in Australia. We, the negative team, strongly disagree with the statement and believe that the burka should not be banned. The affirmative team agree with we, the negative team, agree with the affirmative team's definition in reference to the classification of Islamic headscarves, but would like to address some of the incorrect claims made by the affirmative team's first speaker. The first speaker tried to argue that most Australians want the burka banned. While this may be true, most Australians would also want things like tax to be banned for their own personal reasons, which would have adverse effects on society despite the personal effects that they may have. He also tried to claim that the burka has a symbolic association with terrorism. This association may be true, but comes from long-held prejudices, and is a harmful association that in fact demeans the Muslim community. They also tried to argue that people who wear the burqa feel alienated by society, but the small amount of women that do in fact choose to wear the burqa may in fact feel safer wearing the garment and not feel alienated and may feel comfortable as it is their own preference. They also tried to argue that it's a non-compulsory garment as is not stated in the Quran. This, however, is comparable to priests' robes, nurses' habits, and Christians wearing crosses. In the Bible, it doesn't call for Christians to wear any of these articles, but many do, in fact, to exercise their faith. Today's first speaker, I'll be convincing you that such a ban undermines core Australian values, such as respect for the freedom and religion and dignity of the individual. I'll also argue that banning the burqa could threaten the national security as well as the unconstitutional nature of such a ban. Our second speaker will demonstrate that the main arguments for banning the burqa are based on fear and misunderstanding, rather than facts and evidence, and how legislating what a woman can and can't wear is the ultimate act of oppression by the state. Now to my first point. Australia is a country that prides itself on its diversity of people, nationalities, and religions. Banning the burqa would compromise important Australian values, such as respect for the freedom and dignity of the individual, as well as respect for diversity. It would also be a strong infringement on the religious freedom of a number of Muslim women who choose to wear the burqa. For many, the burqa is a proud expression of their faith and beliefs, comparable to the Christian articles which were earlier mentioned. To ban one of these Christian articles would be viewed as suppressing people's faiths, demeaning their strong, important beliefs. Banning the burqa would do just the same to the Muslim community in Australia, or wherever else it may be banned, belittling the beliefs of a strong and honest demographic of Australians, as well as the values of our whole nation. These said values can be seen in the Australian Values Statement, which all people applying for citizenship in the Commonwealth must agree to. Part of the statement reads, Australian society values respect for the freedom and dignity of the individual and freedom of religion. Singling out a number of women from one particular religion and taking away their freedom to choose what they wear is as far from respecting the freedom and dignity of the individuals and their religion as you can possibly get. Not only would banning the burqa infringe on core Australian values, but a decision to ban it would also infringe upon the Australian Constitution. Banning the burqa would impinge on Australians' religious freedom and breach Section 116 of the Australian Constitution, which states that the Commonwealth shall not make any law prohibiting the free exercise of any religion. As the burqa is an exercise of faith for the Muslim women who choose to wear it, banning the garment would be prohibiting the free exercise of the Islamic faith. This isn't the only legal issue surrounding the banning of the burqa, though. If the ban came to fruition, Muslim women who choose to wear the garment would be forced to make a decision between disobeying their religious beliefs and disobeying the law, potentially further pushing a large number of Muslims into a corner in Australian society. This could potentially pose as a threat to Australian national security, as the marginalisation of the Muslim community in Australia could provoke retaliatory actions from a small number of radicalised individuals within the community. De-radicalisation expert Clark Jones argues that banning the burqa sends a dangerous message to the Muslim community, which can make Islamic youth unwelcome in Australia and possibly lead to radicalisation. This kind of issue has recently been highlighted overseas. After divisive campaigns in France ended with the banning of the burqa, the country has been in a dire situation surrounding national security. Since the ban was passed in 2010, the country has experienced a spike in terror attacks by Muslim extremists. Harrow Ingram, a research fellow at the Australian National University who studies extremist literature, notes that extremist groups have specifically used France's face veil ban as a recruitment tool. So why ban a piece of harmless clothing worn by a minority of our population if it risks provoking such extremist acts? Belittling the beliefs of a community that is already under fire and cornered by not only large portions of the Australian population, but also by whole political parties and groups, will do nothing but inspire further division within the population and provoke certain members of the Muslim community to rebel against the system that singles them out. This has been shown in recent events, as after Queensland Senator Pauline Hanson's burqa stunt in the lower house. Several experts in national security have claimed that such acts by influential individuals undermine the work of Australia's National Intelligence Agency, ASIO, and their relationship with members of the Muslim community. John Blaxland from the Australian National University said Senator Hanson's comments were toxic and counterproductive. Professor Blaxland, who wrote a history of ASIO, said the comments could damage its relationship with the Islamic community. If such damage can be caused by the comments and stupidity of one crazy xenophobe, imagine the damage that a complete ban of the burqa would inflict. On top of this, our current government clearly wished to build a constructive relationship with the Muslim community in Australia, and after Hanson's stunt in Parliament, Attorney General George Brandis argued that to ridicule the Islamic community, to drive it into a corner, to mock its religious garments, is an appalling thing to do. Clearly, banning the burqa would be counterproductive to what our government and our national security agencies are trying to achieve. We should be doing everything to encourage social cohesion in Australia and stifling people's religious freedom through a ban that would just create more divisions. It is for this reason that we believe the burqa should definitely not be banned in Australia. Thank you.
upon the second affirmative speaker, Owen Selby.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and chairman. The topic for tonight's debate is that the burqa should be banned in Australia. As the affirmative team, we strongly agree with this statement, as the burqa is actually creating a division between the people of our proud nation, as it is creating a divide and a sense of the other. And banning it will actually provide us more safety and protection from those who are targeting and attacking Muslim women. Before I elaborate on my own points, however, I will first rebut the opposition's misguided statements. The first negative speaker has told you that the connection between the burqa as a symbol of terrorism and the Muslim faith is demeaning for Muslim women. We agree, it is demeaning, but it is impossible to take away the negative stipulation. It is far easier to ban the Muslim woman from wearing this negative stipulation and therefore inviting the demeaning reaction. By removing this negative stigma, there would be less animosity and connections towards the Muslim faith with Islamic terrorism, and our community would be able to be more cohesive and less divisive over this issue. The first negative speaker also said that if a ban of a burqa was placed, the Muslim people would face a conflict over disobeying their religious beliefs and the law. This isn't actually true. The burqa is not a belief of the Muslim religion. It is simply one way of expressing it. None of their beliefs none of their beliefs are actually being hampered. And as our first speaker pointed out, the wearing of full body covering is not mandated by the Islamic faith, with the Quran stating that women and men dress modestly. Muslim women do have other avenues of religious expression available to them that are more conducive with Australian society, such as the hijab, that does not present the multitude of other problems concerning full body coverings. It is worth noting that laws pertaining to religious freedom do prohibit the placing of restrictions on religion, with the exception of where a ban is necessary to protect public safety, order, health, or morals, or the fundamental rights and freedom of others, which is a quote from section 116 of the Australian Constitution. There are many security concerns with the burqa, which I will bring up later in my speech, as well as how the burqa creates social divide, fit these criteria, and as such, a ban is warranted. Finally, the first negative speaker also again brought up the Pauline Hanson stunt and her rather fanatic and extreme ways of advocating for the ban. We do not condone the way she has gone about it, but it is unfair to say the way she has gone about it is wrong, therefore all of her messages must be wrong. There are some very valid messages and opinions of why the burqa should be banned. Now, on to my own points and those reasons. A common complaint about the burqa from those who wish to see it banned is that those who wear it are failing to truly adapt to the societal norms and way of life in Australia, and are refusing to allow themselves to be fully integrated into our society. Even though we are a multicultural nation and promote ourselves as tolerant and accepting of all cultures and backgrounds, we still have a set of social norms which define the appropriate behaviour within our society. According to psychology.com, norms provide order within a society, and if many members of a group choose to reject these norms, then it will be unable to function harmoniously or effectively. Journalist Andrew MacDonald points out that when he lived in Pakistan, he quickly discovered that it is socially unacceptable to wear shorts, as it is seen as showing too much skin. MacDonald was subject to a hostile reaction when he thought it was fine to wear shorts to the local gym, but after this initial blunder, he accepted the local culture and adjusted his dress sense accordingly, not wearing shorts whilst in Pakistan again. In Australia, the social custom is that people do not conceal their identities when out in public. By choosing to completely cover their face and hide their identities from others, Muslim women who wear the burqa are perceived by many Australians as being unwilling to interact with the larger community, and are forcibly putting up a barrier between themselves and non-Muslim Australians. Dr. Sundus Ali, lecturer at Oxford University, reveals that while she used to wear a burka or niqab on a regular basis, she has stopped doing so because it made her less approachable by her non-Muslim friends and colleagues. And by not wearing it, she's been able to better interact with a larger community. Ali went on to say that the burqa creates the impression that the person wearing it is a very serious person who would not be willing to open up or engage in more light-hearted discussions. Whilst there's no evidence to suggest that women who wear a burqa aren't able to take a joke, this is the perception that it creates, and perception counts for a lot. In Australian society, it is crucial that we do not feel like there is a section of our community that is unintentionally separating itself by adopting a garment that signals to others that they do not wish to be open or to interact with members of our society that do not share their beliefs, especially when that is not the wearer's intention or desire. By banning the burqa, Australian society would find Muslim women far more relatable and ready to become a true part of Australian society, reducing animosity and making communication between Muslim women and the other various cultural groups of Australia much easier. Another reason to ban the burqa is that it actually serves in Muslim women's best interests in terms of keeping them safe and making them far less identifiable for those who are actively looking to attack Muslims. The ABC reveals in a study conducted in July this year that 67.7% of Islamophobia attacks are against women. On top of this, 76.9% of the women who were attacked were wearing head covering at the time. In the current context regarding religious terrorism, Islamophobia attacks are on the rise, and their perpetrators are looking for a clear symbol that their victims are Muslim, which the burqa and niqab unfortunately provide. If women didn't wear burqas in public, the chance of them being attacked is far less, and their own personal safety and well-being in the issue is paramount. The burqa also provides many security concerns regarding concealment of identity, and this has caused issues with law in recent times. Reporter Michelle Hutchinson compares wearing the burqa to wearing a balaclava in public. You, as an individual, know that when you don a balaclava, you are not going to rob a bank. But in order to protect all of a society, we have a norm against wearing balaclavas. The same philosophy must be applied to burqas, especially as the Sydney Herald reports that cameras that capture car accidents, murders, or thefts on camera, but where the perpetrator is wearing a burqa, results in no one being able to be prosecuted as there is no reliable facial recognition to go from. In fact, burqas are also an issue in court where their wearers are asked to stand trial. It is crucial during trials that the witnesses' identities can be verified, which cannot be done if the face is completely hidden. However, some witnesses have refused the request to remove the burqa and confirm their identity to the jury, resulting in key witnesses being dismissed and the integrity of the trial being called into question. It is unacceptable that the piece of clothing is able to stand in the way of justice. Friends, we in the red and black are adamant that if we want our society to continue to function harmoniously, with the least possible amount of division amongst us, then the burqa must be banned. By covering up one's identity, Muslim women are not only compromising the truth in the face of justice,
I call upon the second negative speaker, Mariana Moniz.
To fear what you do not understand is to mistake ignorance for safety. Those are words from American writer Jim Hale. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. As I'm sure you're all aware, the topic of tonight's debate is that the burqa or niqab should be banned in Australia, and we, the negative team, of course believe this statement to be undoubtedly false. Firstly, I will address some of the incorrect claims made by the affirmative team. The first and second affirmative speakers have tried to tell you that the burqa is not integral to the Islamic faith. However, and that it is that women also have the option to pursue their faith using other avenues. However, religion and religious documents are up to the interpretation of the believer themselves. The fact is that some women do choose to express their faith by wearing the burqa, and they should not be denied their constitutional right to do so. The second affirmative speaker also extended and said that this constitutional right does not apply as the burqa is a security threat. However, as I will explain, the burqa does not poses a very minimal security threat to our country, and in fact, other garments pose a much significant threat. The first affirmative speaker also tried to tell you that the burqa was a symbol of misogyny. However, telling women what they can and cannot wear, I would say, is a far larger example of misogyny in itself. The first affirmative speaker also tried to tell you that the burqa banning the burqa would not affect a majority of Australians. However, banning people named Mariana, for example, doesn't affect a large majority of the population either. However, I can tell you, those that it does affect would be very personally offended. Also, the first affirmative speaker also tried to tell you that most people want the burqa to be banned due to a link with terrorism. However, this is just further evidence that the ban on burqa is much more to do with the fear of the burqa than facts itself. And just because lots of people want something does not mean it's actually a good idea. For example, lots of people want taxes to be banned. However, if we did that, we would be in economic ruin. Now for our arguments. Our first speaker has already informed you of the religious symbolism of the burqa and niqab, and that any ban would infringe on Australian constitutional rights regarding the ability to exercise one's religion freely. He also emphasised that any ban could further intensify the threat of extremism due to the increasing marginalisation of Islamic individuals. Today, I will be emphasising that the main arguments for banning the burqa are based on fear and misunderstanding rather than factual evidence. I will explain that wearing the burqa or niqab is not oppressive to women, nor is it a realistic security threat. The banning of the burqa and niqab facilitates the oppression of women rather than preventing it. Legislating or dictating in any way what women can or cannot wear in public is not just oppressive, but wrong. What would you say if someone told you that you couldn't wear hoodies anymore? Would you say that it was unfair or completely absurd? Replace hoodie with burqa or niqab, a garment of religious importance, unlike the hoodie, and suddenly the oppressive nature of such legislation is ignored due to the preconceived ideas stemming from Islamophobia. For instance, in France, a country where the burqa and burkini are banned, there have been horrific demonstrations of oppression of women. Atrocious scenes of armed police officers demanding that women remove them and women be commanded to strip off on beaches. Are these horrendous signs of violation really what we want to see in our country? With scenes such as this, it is no surprise that one French sociologist stated that by enforcing a ban, the French government had created a monster. As for the claim that women are forced to wear burqa, an Open Society Foundation report on women in burqas in France found that of a sample of 32 women, none had been forced to wear the full veil. But let's assume for a moment that although it would be very rare, there are some women who are forced, such as by their husband, for example. As the director of UK human rights pressure group Liberty stated, how do you liberate women by criminalising their clothing? Who is to say that this ban won't cause them to be forbidden to leave the house altogether? It is clear that a ban on the burqa would only facilitate the oppression of Muslim women. Furthermore, the burqa and niqab do not present a realistic security threat to our country, hence rendering its ban unnecessarily extreme and futile. Arguing that a ban on the burqa would assist in protecting Australia from threats such as extremism and terrorism is completely ludicrous when we remind ourselves that there are already laws and protocols in place for facial identification at locations such as airports and courts. Police officers also have the right to ask for the burqa to be removed when they have reason to identify an individual. This process is done in private by a female officer to maintain the dignity of the woman. Therefore, with these laws in place, what need is there for a ban? There is simply none. And common sense tells us there is no more chance of a bomb being hidden underneath a burqa or niqab than a large jacket, priest robe, or even just a bag. And consequently, the direct security threat posed by either the burqa or niqab is extremely low. I mean, what else could you possibly expect when only 2.2% of the population is Muslim, and an even smaller percentage actually wear the garment? And that if that isn't damning enough, then the only instance of the burqa being utilised as a disguise in the commission of a crime being recorded in Australia was committed by a non-Muslim male. If we really want to address security issues surrounding the identification of perpetrators, then it would make more sense to ban balaclavas, motorcycle helmets, or such as Italy, or tinted windows on vans. These are clearly used in substantially more crimes and security breaches and terrorist attacks than the burqa, niqab, and they conceal the identity of the individual just as much, but are less likely to be a sign of one's devotion to their faith. Criminals are still going to conceal their face even with a ban on the burqa or niqab. It actually makes more sense for a balaclava or motorcycle helmet to be used in preference to conceal their identity, as for instance it would allow them to have greater motility. Therefore, the burqa should not be banned due to it imposing a minimal security threat to our nation. In conclusion, when the facts are presented to us, it is no surprise why professors have described a ban on the burqa or niqab as a complete failure in France, and it is clear that it would be no different here. Its ban would serve only to oppress women in the Muslim community who choose to wear this garment of clothing as a representation of their faith, and further oppress the ones that don't. And to argue that it would improve national security would be absurd, as it is highly unlikely that it would be used in a crime in the first place. And finally, to finish with a quote from Nobel Prize winner Lester B. Pearson, "Misunderstanding arising from ignorance breeds fear, and fear remains the greatest enemy of peace." Thank you.
third affirmative speaker, Xavier Mossel.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen and chairman. The topic for tonight's debate is that banning the burqa and niqab in Australia is a good idea. As the affirmative team, we agree with this statement on the grounds that such a ban would serve to decrease severe consequences of Islamophobia in Australian society, and such bans have already been implemented successfully in many European countries. Before I sum up our team's case, I would like to rebut the points put forward by the negative team. The first negative speaker has said that Australia prides itself on its multiculturalism and that a burqa ban would be infringing upon this fundamental Australian ideal. This is true. The first statement in this is true, that the multicultural ideal of Australian society is something that many see as one of its best aspects. And while we agree with Australia being multicultural, the reality is that true multiculturalism can only be achieved when different cultures fully integrate with each other and little fear or mistrust exists between them. The burqa remains a symbol of Islamic fundamentalism, and as we have already explained, discourages interaction between cultures by inhibiting face-to-face communication. In order for Australia to truly function as a multicultural society, where cultures freely interact without distrust, compromises must be made in the order of social cohesion. Banning the burqa, a garment that promotes a hyperbolized and demonized view of Islamic culture, is a good place to start in making Australia truly multicultural in a sense of social cohesion rather than just a sense of there are a lot of cultures here. The first negative speaker also said that banning the burqa will further alienate Muslims and create more social divides in Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, it is human nature to fear that which is different. And in a predominantly Western society like Australia, which has been primarily informed by Catholicism and Christianity, the burqa and niqab form a symbol of the other, being only serve to further differentiate Muslim women and make them objects of fear and distrust for many Australians. Even if there is no reason to, the fact remains that people do sense distrust from people wearing the burqa, and that a ban would decrease this feeling between cultures in the long term by allowing greater social cohesion and more in line with our Australian values. The first speaker also mentioned France and how the burqa ban in France and how that has led to an increase in terrorism, and as such the burqa ban has clearly not been in the favour of that nation. However, France is simply one example of a country that has banned the burqa. Other countries include Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Bulgaria, Russia, China and Switzerland, as well as Morocco, which I will add is a predominantly Muslim country in and of itself. All of these nations have not seen the marked increase in terrorism that France has experienced. So pointing to France as the example that this burqa ban will not work is inherently valuable, seeing as there are so many other nations that have had no such problems. In fact, the reason for France's increase in terrorism is more to do with how they have enforced the burqa ban in the wrong way, which I'll elaborate on later in my speech. The second negative speaker said that arguments against the burqa are formed primarily out of fear and misunderstanding. This is true, but the stigma still exists, even if the fear and misunderstanding from the burqa is inherently irrational. The fact is that there is no easy way to remove this. A ban would alleviate most of the tension felt in society in the long term, and would also alleviate many other issues, including the security issues both of the general Australian public and of Muslim women wearing the headgear, the burqa and niqab themselves, as Owen explained in his speech. The second negative speaker also talked about how the burqa is still religious expression, even if it is not mandated by the faith. And while we cannot deny that the burqa and niqab are forms of religious expression for some Muslim women, the fact remains that this practice is detrimental to the proper functioning of society and creates social divides between people of different faiths. Extreme acts of Islamophobia are unfortunate, but do happen, as Owen explained as Owen explained. And the most common victims are those wearing the facial and head coverings, such as the burqa or niqab. Furthermore, the difficulty of identification for wearers of the burqa is a security concern and has been an obstacle in criminal cases in the past. A ban on all facial coverings, including the burqa, like many other countries have done, is necessary for public safety and falls under the previous criteria mentioned of necessary to protect public safety, order, health, or morals or fundamental rights and freedoms of others. The second negative speaker also talked about how telling women what they can and cannot wear is misogyny in and of itself. We disagree. When we look at it in this term, we are simply prohibiting women from wearing, Muslim women from wearing the burqa or the niqab, and also as any prospective ban would also include any facial covering. It is not specifically targeting them. It is not specifically condemning them for expressing their faith. It is simply addressing a security concern as well as a social divide, and that we're obviously not mandating exactly what they can and cannot wear. We are simply saying that you cannot wear one thing. Also, in addition, the analogy that the second speaker used of the name Mariana is not a security threat, that the name Mariana is uncommon and therefore a ban would only affect a certain amount of people and they would be personally insulted, is inherently not applicable to this discussion. The name Mariana is not a security threat after all. It does not create the massive social divides that the burqa does. And so even though it will affect only a small portion of the population, the fact is a ban is necessary to protect that security, to protect the security, however small the increase might be. The first and second negative speaker also talked about how just because lots of people want the burqa to be banned, that does not make a burqa ban the right move, using the analogy of taxes. Again, taxes are not a security threat and do not create cultural divides in this sense. The burqa is a separate issue. It really needs to be looked at as its own thing, as well as in addition to all facial coverings. Also mentioned, going back to, the second negative speaker also mentioned France again, and their increase in terrorism, and their enforcement issues regarding police officers forcibly removing garments from people. In Australia, this is the wrong way to go about it, and in Australia, we would more likely be a much more lax way of enforcing it. Easily enforceable by police compelling the removal of a burqa in a public setting and issuing fines if the wearer does not comply. Our first speaker, moving on to my team summary, our first speaker, Alex, began by providing essential context on the issue, including how the majority of public opinion is in support of a burqa ban. He's also talked about Islamophobia on the rise in the 21st century and how the burqa is not mandated by the Muslim faith. Our second speaker, Owen, explained how the burqa is of detriment to Australian societal values and of public discourse, and that it increases the sense of the other and increases fear of Islamophobia. Ladies and gentlemen, a ban on the burqa and niqab is the simplest solution to the many problems that our team has raised. And while it may hurt our deified idea of a tolerant Australia, it will provide a net benefit for our society, both in terms of real safety and in terms of perceived safety of the people. Thank you.
call upon the third negative speaker, Alexander Burrow.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for this evening's debate is that the burka and niqab should be banned in Australia. We, the negative team, believe this statement to be incredibly misinformed and dangerous. I'd first like to begin by pointing out some of the flaws in the affirmative team's arguments. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that a large number of Australians wish for the burka to be banned. Now, while this statement might be true, most Australians would also support the banning of compulsory voting. However, if we ban them, it would completely undermine our democracy, just as banning the burka would undermine social cohesion. The first affirmative speaker has also tried to convince you that the burka is not a crucial Islamic garment, insinuating that it's a cultural preference of specific Islamic groups. Whilst most modern interpretations of religious faith are cultural. For example, some Christians wear a cross, some don't. Some nuns wear a habit, some don't. Different cultures and different countries will interpret religion differently. And yes, the Quran does emphasise the value of modesty through dress. And yes, some Muslim women interpret this in different ways. For example, some wear no head covering, some wear a hijab, and a small minority wear the burqa. But this comes down to their choice and their right to exercise their religious freedom. The first affirmative speaker has also tried to state that the burqa advocates misogyny, despite also stating that it's the choice of the woman to wear such garments. This is not a reason to ban it. If we're talking about inequality between men and women's dress codes, why do women feel the need to wax their bikini lines or shave their legs? Should we ban women from such practices because of unfair social expectations placed on women? The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that the banning of the burqa would lead to a greater understanding of the Islamic faith and would lead to greater cohesion with the faith. However, banning the burqa would further advocate the objectification of the Islamic faith, as it would promote an us versus them mentality, which has led to so many atrocities throughout human history around the world. The second affirmative speaker has also tried to tell you that Islamophobic attacks are provoked by women wearing burqas, as they are easily identifiable as being Muslim. Immediately, they've contradicted their own point, suggesting that Muslim women opt to wear the hijab over the burqa or niqab. The hijab is just as identifiable as being a Muslim garment, thus the aforementioned argument is flawed. The second affirmative speaker finally stated that Islamic women wearing the burqa whilst on trial undermines the integrity of our justice system. However, New South Wales has already passed legislation requiring such women to reveal their faces, at least for identification purposes. This is conducted by female judicial officers so not to undermine or intrude on the dignity of the woman. If other states follow, adopting cooperative federalism so that there's consistency with laws around the country, this is a far more cohesive solution than banning the garment entirely. The third affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that multiculturalism cannot be fully achieved until all cultures fully integrate. And sure, this could be considered a fair statement, I'll credit you with that. However, if this be true, then no nation or community will ever achieve multiculturalism due to the traditional and historic rivalries between different ethnicities. The third affirmative speaker also suggested that the stigma associated with the fear of the burqa is difficult to remove. This is also a true statement. However, the stigma is far more realistically associated with the fear of Islam or Islamophobia. So, why not? Let's go and ban Islam in Australia. We've all seen how well that worked in the United States when coming from the mouth of President Trump. And now to summarise the arguments that we've presented with you this evening. Our first speaker outlined how banning the burqa and niqab is a direct violation of the Islamic woman's freedom to exercise her religious observance and is in direct contravention of the Australian Constitution. Section 116 of the Constitution precludes the Commonwealth from legislating in areas which may prohibit the free exercise of any religion. Therefore, banning the burqa would directly undermine the Constitution, Australia's most fundamental document which dictates our nation's governance. Furthermore, our first speaker also explained how burning the burqa and niqab undermines our Australian values, particularly freedom and dignity of the individual. Banning the burqa would therefore repress the ability for Muslim women to express their devotion to their faith, a fundamental aspect of many people's personality and lives, regardless of their race or religion. This kind of objectification would be profoundly retorted if it were directed at any other religion. Our second speaker highlighted how the wearing of the burqa or niqab is not oppressive to Muslim women, as the affirmative team would have you believe. It is true that a large majority of Muslim women choose not to wear the burqa, instead opting to wear the hijab, other scarves, or nothing at all. And while some may argue that a ban would therefore not restrict the freedom of Muslim women, as it affects so few, it can be likened to restricting the ability for children to dress up as their favourite superheroes, to express their belief in such fantasies. And whilst in no way am I comparing such fantasies with religion, the principle remains the same. Our second speaker also discussed how the large majority of arguments in support of banning the burqa are founded on fear and misunderstanding of the actual security threats that the burqa or niqab present, rather than facts and evidence. It's far more likely that a crime or act of terror would be committed in hoodies, balaclavas, motorcycle helmets, or believe it or not, no form of concealment at all. And based on recent events, shouldn't we ban the use of trucks, vans, or other large utility vehicles in public places? Social attitudes would have you believe that that's a step too far, but then again, people seem to be okay with objectifying minorities. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's evident from this evening's debate that the push to ban the burqa is founded on nothing more than fear and misunderstanding. Whilst the common conception is that the burqa is an oppressive garment which subjugates Muslim women, it's typically the choice of the women to adopt such dress. Furthermore, the supposed security threats related to the wearing of the burqa are virtually non-existent and are no more of a risk than other forms of concealment, such as the aforementioned balaclavas and hoodies. To introduce legislation which dictates the method of observance of a religious group, particularly a minority within that group, in the name of national security, encourages the perilous behaviours and attitudes which the laws would seek to eliminate. Think for a moment. How would you feel if your government, the government of your liberal and democratic nation, arbitrarily passed laws which prevented you from expressing your beliefs? Would you prevent a Christian, a Buddhist, or even an agnostic from expressing their beliefs? Why is Islam any different? Thank you.